The email arrived quietly on a Thursday morning in February of 2022. Corporal Mark Barron, a seasoned investigator with the Pennsylvania State Police, clicked it open with hands that trembled before he even understood why. 57 years, 10 months, and 23 days. This was how long Pennsylvania had waited for an answer. The report was short, precise, clinical, but the implications were earth-shattering. The match probability was listed as 1 in 480 septillion. To understand that number, you need to place it against the scale of humanity itself. Scientists estimate that across all of human history, only about 117 billion people have ever lived. To find another person with the DNA profile found on the evidence from the crime scene, you would need to search for million planet Earths. And yet the man identified by this essentially impossible statistic had been dead for 42 years. When he murdered 9-year-old Marie Anne Chiverella on a cold March morning in 1964, he lived only blocks away from her home. Investigators would later discover that from one of his bedrooms, he had a direct view of the cemetery where the little girl was laid to rest. His name had never appeared in a single investigative file. Not once. Not as a suspect. Not as a person of interest. Not even as a passing mention. His secret remained buried with him. Until now. Welcome to Buried Secret Media. If you care about justice, even when it takes decades, trust me, you will want to stay with me until the very end of this story. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these important stories alive. Let's begin at the very start. It was Wednesday, March 18, 1964. Hazleton, Pennsylvania, was still waking up. This was early spring Pennsylvania, sharp winds, the smell of coal residue still lingering from decades of mining, and mornings cold enough to sting your cheeks. Inside the modest home at 533 Alter Street, 9-year-old Marie Anne Chiverella was excited. Tomorrow would be the feast of St. Joseph at her Catholic school, and she had spent the night before carefully selecting canned goods from her father's small grocery store, pear slices and beets, to bring to her teacher, Sister Josephine. Marie was a tiny girl, just 55 pounds, with dark hair, bright blue eyes, and a sweetness people remembered for decades. She was shy, gentle, thoughtful. She had dreams of becoming a nun. Her parents had recently bought her a small organ from Sears, and she spent evenings teaching herself hymns. Marie asked her parents if she could walk to school alone that morning, something she rarely did. She wanted to get to Mass early. She wanted to make her offering. She wanted to be good and on time. Her parents said yes. Between 7:50 and 8 o'clock, she bundled herself tightly against the wind, wrapped her multicolored scarf around her neck, grabbed her school bag and canned goods, and stepped out the front door. Hazleton was the kind of town where neighbors looked after each other's children. Several people saw her on the sidewalk, fighting against the icy gusts. One cousin of her mother saw her near West 4th Street and considered calling her inside to warm up. Others offered their porches. Marie politely declined each time. She was determined to make it to church. That moment, her polite refusal, her determined walk, is the last time anyone saw her alive. By lunchtime, it became clear something was wrong. Marie had not arrived at school. Her teacher marked her absent all morning. When her siblings came home for lunch and Marie didn't follow, her father, Carmen, became alarmed. He retraced her walking route. He checked the church. He knocked on doors. He asked neighbors. Then a woman stopped him. Her face had changed the moment she saw the fear in Carmen's eyes. "Are you looking for the little girl?" she asked quietly. They found her, 3 miles outside town, in an abandoned coal stripping pit near Hazleton Municipal Airport. A man named Arthur Robinson had been giving his nephew driving lessons. He brought ashes to discard into the pit, a dumping ground for refuse. As he looked over the edge, he saw something that made him pause. A doll, he thought. A discarded store mannequin. But as he got closer, 20, 30 feet down, he realized it wasn't a doll. It was a child. He raced away in his car and called the Pennsylvania State Police. When investigators and clergy arrived, one of the priests recognized her immediately. It was Marie. This was the day Hazleton would never forget. Hazleton in 1964 was a coal town built by immigrants. It was a place where children walked to school alone. Neighbors watched out for each other. Church bells marked time. Doors were left unlocked. The murder of a child was unthinkable. It shattered the illusion of safety overnight. Parents held their children closer. Doors began to lock. Curfews were enforced. People would later say, there was life before Marie's murder and life after. The town's innocence died with her. The funeral drew crowds, so long they stretched out the doors of the funeral home. The church was full to the brim. Marie's mother, Mary, gave her daughter one final kiss before the casket closed. Hazleton had lost one of its children, and it would never be the same. Pennsylvania State Police launched one of the most exhaustive investigations in the state's history. Troopers worked 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, for months. Why? Because the killer had died in 1980, long before DNA databases existed. The case went cold again, until 2019. The Pennsylvania State Police partnered with Parabon Nanolabs. Using cutting-edge DNA phenotyping, Parabon created composite images predicting hair color, eye color, skin tone, ancestry. These images were released publicly. No one recognized the face. But what happened next would change everything. Parabon uploaded the killer's DNA to GenealogistMatch, a public genealogy site used by millions of people who took at-home DNA tests. The match they found was faint, very faint. A distant relative, sixth cousin range. Barely a thread. But it was a thread that could be followed. Police needed someone who could do what few people in the world could. Someone who could take that faint genetic thread and weave it into a map of ancestors and descendants. They needed a genealogist. And one found them. In February of 2020, an 18-year-old college freshman named Eric Schubert emailed the Pennsylvania State Police. He had been researching genealogy since he was 8. He had worked cases before. He offered to help for free. Most police departments would ignore such an email. But Lieutenant Devin Brutsky didn't. He vetted Eric's work. He saw his results. And he took a chance. Eric was given partial access to genealogical data and began what would become a 2-year project. He spent up to 20 hours a week building family trees. Thousands of names, hundreds of branches, dozens of cross-reference lines. Slowly, painfully, the suspect pool narrowed. 2,000 possible people. 1,000. 500. 100. 10. 4. Then 1. A name that had never appeared in any of the original investigation files. James Paul Forte. And he had been dead since 1980. James Paul Forte was born in July of 1941. He lived in Hazleton his whole life. He attended Hazleton High School, joined the Army, worked in bars, sold supplies, and lived a quiet, forgettable existence. But there were disturbing signs. In 1974, he violently assaulted a 23-year-old woman. He received probation. In 1978, he was arrested again. In 1980, he collapsed at work and died. He lived just 6 blocks from the Chiverella family in 1964. One of his homes overlooked St. Joseph's Cemetery, Marie's resting place. Still, his name appeared nowhere in the original case files. Not even a single line. He was a ghost. But now, through DNA and genealogy, he had a name again. To be absolutely certain, investigators needed DNA from Forte himself. That required an exhumation. In January 2022, with a court order and the cooperation of cemetery officials, investigators exhumed his remains. A tissue sample was taken and analyzed. The results arrived February 3rd. It was an exact match. 1 in 480 septillion. The killer, who had hidden in plain sight for 6 decades, had finally been identified. Justice had arrived, half a century late, but unmistakable. On February 10, 2022, the Pennsylvania State Police held a press conference. The room filled with investigators, prosecutors, reporters, retired troopers, family members, and the 19-year-old genealogist who solved the case. Corporal Mark Barron choked up as he spoke. Lieutenant Brutsky explained, "Over half of our department's existence, we have investigated this case." Marie's siblings spoke bravely. They said justice had come. They said their parents could finally rest. They thanked investigators for never giving up. The story that haunted Hazleton for nearly 60 years finally had a name. And that name was James Paul Forte. Marie's case became the fourth oldest cold case in U.S. history ever solved by genetic genealogy. The oldest solved in Pennsylvania. A landmark example of preserving evidence. But it became something deeper, a proof that no matter how long it takes, truth will surface. Science will catch up. And DNA will remember. This is why cold cases must never be forgotten. And why justice, even delayed, still matters. If you've stayed with us this far, remember to like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Buried Secret Media. Believe it or not, the story goes even deeper. The truth isn't just in the science or in the files. It's also in the 40-plus years of silence that James Paul Forte left behind. A silence that investigators and genealogists would eventually break apart piece by piece. This is where our story becomes more than a solved case. It becomes a study of justice across generations. Long before genetic genealogy existed, before DNA was understood, before crime labs were anything like the highly technical facilities they are today, a small group of Pennsylvania State Police officers began documenting what they believed would eventually matter. They could not have imagined genetic sequencing or the ability to read ancestry from a drop of biological material. But they did know one thing. Careful work lasts forever. Retired Trooper Donald Good, one of the first responders in 1964, later told reporters that preserving clothing, fibers, and photographs felt instinctively important. Even if they didn't yet know why. He could not have known that, decades later, the oldest surviving fibers on Marie's jacket would hold secrets the killer never imagined DNA could reveal. Investigators interviewed neighbors, friends, siblings, teachers, religious officials, business owners, strangers, and travelers passing through town. By the end of the first year, they had amassed nearly 4,600 pages of notes, reports, and interviews. Every word would matter later. Even the false confessions. Even the dead-end leads. Even the vague memories. Because in forensic genealogy, small details can confirm or contradict entire branches of family trees. This early work would form the skeleton of the case, and one day, it would guide the teenager who traced a killer's lineage backward across continents and forward across generations. To understand the shockwaves of this case, it is important to understand Hazleton across the decades. After Marie's murder, families changed habits overnight. Children were walked to school. Neighbors formed informal watch groups. The idea of "it can't happen here" was gone forever. The 1970s brought new concerns. Crime nationally was rising, and Hazleton was no exception. Rumors persisted that Marie's killer might still be alive, still in town, still watching from the shadows. Every time a crime occurred, even unrelated minor ones, people whispered, could it be the same person? Ironically, in 1980, when James Paul Forte collapsed at work and died at only 38 years old, most investigators believed Marie's killer had likely moved away or was still alive somewhere. No one suspected the man who poured drinks behind a bar, who walked local streets unnoticed, who lived near the same cemetery that held his victim. His death closed the door on any traditional interrogation, confession, or arrest. But it did not close the door on truth. For more than half a century, the Pennsylvania State Police reviewed the case annually. Each generation of investigators inherited the same commitment. Do not let Marie become a forgotten file. Retired investigators would recount that over the years, new detectives would come in full of energy. They would dig through the 5,000 pages. They would track down anyone still alive. They would make new notes. They would hope for a break. And each time they came back to the same painful truth. The case could not move forward without a scientific breakthrough. Lieutenant Devin Brutsky would later say, "This case has lived longer than most of our careers." He was right. When the case was finally solved, the Pennsylvania State Police had been investigating it for more than half of the department's entire existence. Let that sink in. More than half the life of the department, dedicated in some way to one little girl. In 2007, the miracle investigators had hoped for arrived. The ability to extract a full DNA profile from the material found on Marie's clothing. This was a breakthrough that could have solved the case instantly, but it didn't. Why? Because the killer's DNA had never been collected. Because he had died long before DNA was required from offenders. Because the sample did not match anyone in Cody's. Hope was rekindled, but answers remained out of reach. Still, investigators checked the profile every single month. Imagine that kind of commitment, month after month after month, for 12 straight years. Each time, the result was the same. No match. But even in those years of silence, something important was happening. Technology was advancing. Companies like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe were expanding. Millions of people were uploading their genetic data. Genealogists were learning new ways to track family lines. A scientific revolution was coming, and it would change everything. The turning point came in 2018 with the arrest of a Golden State Killer. Using distant DNA relatives from public genealogy sites, a genealogist built a family tree back several generations, and then forward again, identifying the perpetrator. Law enforcement around the country saw the power of this new approach. Genealogists saw it. Scientists saw it. Cold case investigators saw it. Families waiting for answers felt hope again. For the first time in history, a killer who left behind even the tiniest biological trace could be identified using distant cousins, historical census records, marriage certificates, immigration documents, obituaries, and family trees. It was a fusion of genetics, history, and detective work. A new era had begun. For Marie's case, this era would arrive just in time. Unlike traditional forensic DNA, which compares only a few markers, consumer DNA tests analyze hundreds of thousands. They reveal patterns of shared ancestry. Here is how forensic genealogy works, made simple. Step 1. Upload DNA from a crime scene. Investigators upload the unknown DNA to a public genealogy site that allows law enforcement access. Step 2. Look for relatives. Instead of finding an exact match, they look for distant relatives. A match could be a third cousin, a fourth cousin, even a sixth cousin. These tiny matches, sometimes less than 1% shared DNA, can still point to a shared ancestor. Step 3. Build the family tree. Genealogists identify the common ancestor and build forward through the generations, tracking births, marriages, deaths, divorces, adoptions, relocations, military service, census records. Step 4. Narrow down the field. Eventually, the family tree points to a handful of individuals who were male, if the DNA is male, lived in the right area, were the right age, had the right ancestry, match the timeline. Step 5. Get confirmation DNA. A direct sample from a suspect, a relative, or in this case, an exhumed body, confirms the identity. It is meticulous, delicate, and extraordinarily powerful. And that brings us back to the young man who changed everything for the Chiverella family. When 18-year-old Eric Schubert emailed the Pennsylvania State Police in early 2020, he expected nothing. He was a college freshman in a dorm room. But he also had more than a decade of genealogical experience, rare for someone his age. Lieutenant Brutsky later said, "We thought, why not? Let's see what he can do." What Eric did was astonishing. He spent late nights, early mornings, weekends, holidays, building tree after tree, chasing leads, eliminating false connections, studying surnames, understanding immigrant paths, mapping Hazelton's historical families. At first, the DNA match was a needle in a haystack, a distant sixth cousin. But Eric followed that thread backward through more than 2 centuries of ancestry. He built trees with hundreds of branches, then dozens, then 4 possible men. One stood out, James. Paul Forte. Eric had given investigators the missing piece. But the story wasn't over. To prove definitively that Forte was the killer, investigators needed direct DNA. They needed a sample from the man himself. But Forte had been dead since 1980. There was only one option: exhume his body. Courts approved the request. Cemetery officials cooperated. In January 2022, under a cold Pennsylvania sky, investigators and forensic experts carefully removed Forte's remains. A tissue sample was taken. It was sent to the laboratory. And on February 3rd, almost 58 years after the murder, the DNA match came back. 1 in 480 septillion. The margin for error was essentially zero. James Paul Forte had murdered Marie. On February 10, 2022, investigators gathered in a large room at the Hazel Township Commons. Dozens of community members attended. Retired troopers who had worked the case in the 1960s were present. Current troopers stood beside them. Prosecutors joined. Reporters packed the back wall. And in the front row sat Marie's siblings. When Corporal Mark Barron took the podium, he began speaking firmly. But by the middle of his statement, his voice cracked. He paused. He wiped his eyes. Nearly 60 years of emotional weight pressed on every word. He said, "This is the day the family has been waiting for." He described Marie's innocence, her dreams, her kindness, the pain her family lived through, the dedication of law enforcement across generations. Lieutenant Brutsky spoke next. "This case has lasted more than half the lifetime of this department," he said. Then 19-year-old genealogist Eric Schubert spoke, humbled and emotional. "This was the hardest genealogical work I've ever done," he admitted, "but it was worth everything to bring answers to the family." Marie's siblings then stepped up. Carmen Marie spoke for the family. "Our parents wanted only one thing, justice for Marie. Today we have that." For the first time in nearly 6 decades, the Chiverella family knew the truth. For the first time, the town could breathe. For the first time, Marie could rest. And Hazelton could move forward. The announcement of the killer's identity did not close the book on the case. Instead, it opened new chapters, questions long buried, whispers long ignored, and wounds the community didn't realize still lived inside them. Because once the name James Paul Forte was spoken aloud, people began to remember things. Moments, encounters, odd behaviors, stories their parents once told them. And suddenly, Marie's case no longer felt like an isolated tragedy. It felt like a warning siren echoing through time. Pennsylvania State Police made an announcement that startled the room. They believed Forte may have attacked before and attacked after Marie's murder. This was not speculation. It was based on patterns common in offender behavior and evidence that surfaced after the press conference. The 1974 assault. 10 years after Marie's murder, Forte brutally assaulted a 23-year-old woman. The similarities were sickening. An isolated location, early morning hours, physical restraint, violence escalating quickly, Forte attempting to control the victim's movement. The woman survived. Marie did not. Investigators later said, the 1974 attack is what Marie might have survived had she been older. It was the first concrete sign that Marie was likely not Forte's only victim. After the public announcement of Forte's identity, a woman reached out to the state police. Her voice shook as she told investigators something she had kept buried for more than 50 years. Her name was Gina Donaconnors. She said, "I was about 9, maybe 10. I was walking with my friend near Alter Street. A man in a car stopped us. He leaned out and told us to get in. He kept insisting. He didn't take no for an answer. We ran into the A&P store. We were terrified." When she saw Forte's photo at the press conference, she felt chills. "It was him," she said. "I'm sure of it. It was him." Her account added weight to investigators' growing belief that Forte had been targeting children long before 1964. Corporal Mark Barron addressed the room during a later interview. "We cannot say with certainty how many he hurt. What we can say is that predators do not commit one crime. Lieutenant Brutsky echoed him. This was not likely an isolated act. We are asking the public for help. Any memories, any encounters, any stories from 1964 to 1980. Investigators released a public hotline number, knowing that after 60 years, evidence might be gone, but memories were not. Some people called. Some gave names. Some told of near misses or frightening encounters. Some mentioned behavior from Forte that, in hindsight, seemed deeply unsettling. While none of these accounts could be proven after so much time, they painted a disturbing portrait. Forte had not been a man who snapped once. He appeared to be a man who hunted. As the dust settled, investigators, both retired and active, reflected on what the case meant to them. Retired Trooper Donald Good. In his late 80s at the press conference, Good said softly, "Every year, on the anniversary of her death, I thought about her." He looked at the room full of journalists and added, "I thought this case would never be solved. I really did. But here we are." Corporal Mark Barron. Barron, who wept during the initial announcement, later explained why. Some cases get under your skin. This one stays in your heart. I read thousands of pages. I saw the innocence in her face. I knew we had to find him. Lieutenant Devin Brutsky. Brutsky, who approved the decision to take a chance on a teenage genealogist, said, "You never know where answers will come from, but you have to keep the door open." Retired investigators Thomas McAndrew and Sean Williams. Both had spent years reviewing the Chiverella file. They said the same thing. The original investigators did everything right. If they hadn't preserved that evidence, we wouldn't be talking about this today. This case was more than a file to them. It was a promise, one they finally kept. This case is not just a local story or a family tragedy. It is a national milestone in forensic history. The identification of Marie's killer is one of the oldest cold cases ever solved in the United States. The oldest in Pennsylvania, solved through genetic genealogy. The most surprising genealogical breaks, given the distance of the DNA match. It proved something groundbreaking. Even distant relatives, 5th, 6th, 7th cousins, are enough to solve murders. This expanded the potential of forensic genealogy from a tool used in decades old, but solvable cases, to a tool capable of reaching across entire centuries of family history. Cold cases once deemed too old now had new life. Forensic genealogy began opening doors to cases from the 1970s, cases from the 1950s, cases from the 1930s, unidentified remains from the 1920s, and even cases from the early 20th century. Hundreds of families across America watched Marie's press conference and thought, if they solved a case nearly 60 years old, maybe they can solve ours too. The Chiverella case reignited a national debate. Should law enforcement have access to genealogy databases? Millions of people upload their DNA to find relatives, not to assist police investigations. Some argued, my DNA is my DNA. My relatives shouldn't be implicated through my choices. Others argued, if it helps solve murders and end decades of pain, it's worth it. But here is the key. Genealogy sites used for criminal investigations require users to opt in. Investigators must follow strict guidelines. Searches are limited to violent crimes. Many require a warrant. In Marie's case, legal and ethical protocols were fully followed. The Chiverella family later said, if not for forensic genealogy, we'd still be waiting. Their hope overshadowed the debate. But the debate remains important, because as science evolves, so must the laws that govern it. Hazelton had lived with this wound for nearly 6 decades. When the press conference aired, thousands of local residents tuned in. Many had never seen Marie's photograph before. Many were children themselves when she was killed. Some were born decades later, but had still grown up hearing the story. The reaction was emotional. Older residents cried. They remembered the day fear entered Hazelton. Middle-aged residents expressed relief. They had grown up with the legend of the unsolved case. Younger residents felt shock. They never imagined the killer might have been a familiar face walking down the same streets. Community leaders held gatherings. Churches dedicated masses. Schools discussed the case as a lesson in persistence and justice. Marie was no longer just a name whispered in cautionary tales. She became a symbol, a lesson, a reminder that the past never truly stays buried. Hazleton finally exhaled after 58 years. For Marie's siblings, Ron, Carmen Marie, Barry, and David, closure came mixed with grief. They learned the man who took their sister lived just blocks away. They learned he saw the cemetery where Marie was buried. They learned he likely harmed others. They learned he escaped justice in life. And yet, when asked how they felt, they said, "We forgive him, but we needed to know the truth." Carmen Marie said, "Justice has been served today." Ron, holding back tears, added, "What could have been? What would have been?" We will always ask those questions. But they also expressed something profound. We are grateful. Today we finally know. Marie's case lit a fire across the country. After the press conference, law enforcement agencies in multiple states contacted the Pennsylvania State Police for guidance on using forensic genealogy. Her case inspired new funding, new training, new genealogical partnerships, renewed focus on unsolved murders. Some agencies even reopened cases from the 1940s and 1930s. Marie's story showed that with modern science, no case is too cold, no time span is too long, no killer is ever truly safe. Marie was 9 years old. She wanted to bring canned pears and beets to her teacher. She wanted to make it to Mass. She wanted to learn music. She wanted to be a nun. She never got to grow up. She never got to live out her dreams. She never got justice in life. But she got justice in history. Because the investigators in 1964 preserved evidence. Because future investigators refused to give up. Because a teenage genealogist cared enough to try. Because science marched forward even when the world did not. Because truth waited patiently beneath the surface. And because Marie's family never stopped hoping. To understand how a man like James Paul Forte escaped suspicion for nearly 60 years, we need to look at who he was publicly and who he was privately. Because the truth is unsettling. Forte didn't blend into Hazleton because he was charming. He didn't go unnoticed because he was invisible. He went unnoticed because he lived in the folds of everyday life. Quiet, distant, ordinary. Predators like him flourish not in the shadows, but in the blind spots. James Paul Forte was born in July of 1941 in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. He grew up in a working-class immigrant family. He attended Hazleton High School and graduated in 1959. His yearbook quote painted him as tall, blue-eyed, handsome, loves sports, future undecided. Nothing about him raised red flags. No one remembered him as dangerous. He didn't stand out in any meaningful way. But his quietness wasn't innocence. It was camouflage. After high school, he enlisted in the United States Army. He served from 1959 until 1962. His discharge was uneventful, neither heroic nor scandalous. When he returned home, Forte didn't build a family. He didn't marry. He didn't have children. He didn't form deep friendships. He worked in bars, sometimes as a bartender, sometimes in supply sales. He rented rooms, moved between apartments, drifted in and out of local circles. But there is one detail investigators later found chilling. One of Forte's homes on West 14th Street sat directly across from St. Joseph's Slovak Roman Catholic Cemetery. From one of his bedroom windows, he had a clear view of the place where Marie Anne Chiverella was buried. Investigators don't believe this was a coincidence. They believe he liked being close to the secret he carried. Evil sometimes enjoys revisiting its work. This question troubled investigators and genealogists alike. How does a killer who lived 6 blocks away escape notice for 58 years? Lieutenant Brutsky explained the uncomfortable truth. He never came up because no one gave us his name. Not one neighbor. Not one acquaintance. Not one coworker. Not one family member. No one suspected him. There are 3 reasons for this. 1. Forte's victim was random. There was no link between him and the Chiverella family. He did not know Marie. He did not stalk her beforehand. He took an opportunity, a child walking alone in the wind. Random violence is the hardest to solve. 2. Forte's public behavior was unremarkable. He didn't brag. He didn't hint. He didn't confide. He simply lived. People who knew him described him as quiet, moody, withdrawn, not particularly likable, but not outwardly dangerous. 3. The early investigation had no way to find him. 1964 had no DNA, no computers, no databases, no forensic tools that could connect a man like Forte to a crime scene unless he left fingerprints, or unless someone named him. He left neither. And so, he slipped between the cracks of time. A decade after Marie's murder, Forte struck again. But this time, the victim survived. In April of 1974, at 4 o'clock in the morning, Forte offered to drive a 23-year-old woman home from a bar. But he didn't take her home. Instead, he drove her into a remote area, with trees, dirt roads, and no houses nearby. The assault was violent. The struggle was desperate. And by sheer luck, a truck happened to pass by. Startled, Forte panicked. He let the woman go. She reported him immediately. Police found mud on his car, matching the area where the assault occurred. They found hair from the victim in the front seat. Forte was arrested, charged, and, shockingly, given only probation. Investigators later said, if DNA had existed in 1974, we would have had him. But fate gave him another escape, another chance to hurt, and he may have taken it. In 1978, Forte was arrested again, this time for reckless endangerment and harassment. A man matching his description was running around with a firearm in a residential area. Records from this case have since been lost. But the pattern is undeniable. Unpredictable behavior, escalating aggression, reckless impulses, a disregard for consequences. And then, 2 years later, his life ended abruptly. On May 16, 1980, at the age of 38, Forte collapsed inside the Genetti's Best Western Motor Lodge where he worked. The cause of death was believed to be natural, heart failure or a heart attack. He died believing he had escaped justice. He died believing his secret was buried. He died never knowing that one day investigators would lift him from the ground to take what he had left behind, his DNA. Forte left no children, no legacy, no one to mourn him deeply. His grave sat quietly in a Pennsylvania cemetery for decades. But science does not care about silence. Science does not care about time. One day, investigators would come for him. For years, the Chiverella case hovered like a ghost over Hazleton. It shaped an entire generation of parents, children, and community habits. People began to say things like, nothing good happens before sunrise. Never walk alone. Stay close, stay where we can see you. A place once known for trust became known for caution. Older residents remember the day Marie disappeared, the sirens, the whispers, the newspaper headlines, the sense of safety dissolving. Some said, Hazleton was never the same after that day. Marie's case proved something investigators across the nation needed to hear. It is never too late, no matter how cold, no matter how old, no matter how impossible. The truth is not lost. It is simply waiting. One detective put it best. As long as evidence exists, the case is alive. Marie's story sparked renewed efforts across the country. Cases reopened in Ohio. Cases revisited in Illinois. Decades old, remains identified in Georgia. A 1987 murder solved in California. New laws proposed in multiple states. Her legacy spread quietly, city by city, courthouse by courthouse. Justice ripples outward. Marie's case also became a blueprint for solving cold cases through DNA and genealogy. Law enforcement realized, you do not need a close relative to solve a crime. You just need a thread. Fifth cousins, sixth cousins, distant branches of family trees. These connections, once thought useless, now solve some of the hardest cases in American history. The ripple effect is enormous. Unidentified remains are finally being named. Serial offenders are being exposed. Victims' families are receiving answers they never thought possible. This is the dawn of a new age in justice, and Marie's case stands at the center of it. Years after her parents passed away, Marie's siblings finally heard the truth they had prayed for. They stood before cameras, reporters, and investigators, not with anger, but with grace. Carmen Marie said, "Our parents asked for justice, never revenge. Today, we have justice." Ron added, "We will always wonder what she might have become, but we are grateful to know the truth." Their words, simple and sincere, revealed the heart of the story. The killer is not the center of this narrative. Marie is. Her family is. Her community is. This case, almost 60 years old, is not about darkness. It is about perseverance, dedication, science, and love that never faded. Once the Pennsylvania State Police confirmed the DNA match to James Paul Forte, investigators did something crucial. They reconstructed his life year by year, month by month, address by address, job by job, behavior by behavior. If you want to understand Predator, you study his shadow. And Forte's shadow stretched longer than anyone realized. Investigators pieced together every address Forte ever lived in. 1964. He was 22. He lived 6 to 7 blocks from Marie's home. He walked those streets daily. He knew the church, the school, the routes children took. He could see patterns. He could see opportunity. He had no criminal record then. No one suspected him. He blended into the background like static. The years that followed. After the murder, Forte did not move away. He stayed in Hazleton. He worked in bars, watched people, learned routines. He attacked at least one woman in 1974. He may have attempted to kidnap children, as later reports suggest. He escalated unpredictably. He seemed to drift through life without connection or accountability. 1980. He collapsed at age 38. No one realized Hazleton's predator had died. And that was why the case went cold again. Because the killer was no longer living. But his DNA was. And that DNA waited in a plastic evidence bag in a police locker for nearly 6 decades, until science finally learned how to extract its secrets. Forte did not fit the Hollywood stereotype of a killer. He wasn't loud. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't brilliant. He wasn't deranged in any visible way. He was ordinary. And that is what made him dangerous. Predators like Forte are not defined by their outward behavior. They are defined by 3 chilling characteristics. 1. They act impulsively when opportunity appears. He saw Marie walking alone. He acted fast. He used force. He silenced her. 2. They rely on community trust to remain hidden. Hazleton was a town where people believed a neighbor would never do this. Forte weaponized that trust. 3. They adapt after violence. Forte went silent for years. Then attacked again in 1974. Then hit again. This on-off pattern helped him avoid detection. He was not brilliant. He was not calculating. He was simply unchecked. And unchecked violence is the most dangerous kind. When the press conference ended. When the microphones were packed away. When the last reporter left the room. The Chiverella siblings stayed behind. Investigators hugged them. Retired troopers shook their hands. And for the first time since 1964, the family felt a weight lift. Hazleton, once shaken, once terrified, felt something too. Relief, release, and peace. The name that haunted the shadows of their memories was finally dragged into the light. Forte did not win. Violence did not win. Silence did not win. Time did not win. Justice did. Marie's case now stands as one of the greatest examples of perseverance in American forensic history. It proved something essential. There is no cold case. There are only cases waiting for the right moment, the right science, the right eyes, and the right heart. Families across the country began calling their police departments asking, "Can our case be reopened? Can genealogy help us too? Could there be evidence left behind?" And for the first time in decades, the answer was finally, yes. Yes, it can. Yes, it might. Yes, there is hope. Marie became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of possibility. Imagine Hazleton today. Quiet streets, modern cars, children walking with backpacks, parents watching from porches. Life has moved on, but memories remain. In St. Joseph's Cemetery, where the wind moves gently through rows of stones, Marie's grave rests beneath a tree. Her name still carved, still visited, still remembered. And in another cemetery miles away, James Paul Forte lies in a grave that once held a terrible secret. A secret the earth could not keep. Because science unearthed it. Persistence unearthed it. Justice unearthed it. And all of it, the entire truth, emerged because one 9-year-old girl refused to be forgotten. The investigators didn't give up. Her family didn't give up. A teenage genealogist didn't give up. And neither should we. Marie Anne Chiverella dreamed of being a nun. She loved church. She loved music. She loved kindness. She believed in good. And though her life was tragically short, her impact spans generations. She changed investigators. She changed a town. She changed forensic science. She changed the way America solves its darkest mysteries. Her story will not fade. Her name will not fade. Her legacy will not fade. Because justice, no matter how delayed, always has a way of finding its way home. If you believe Marie deserved justice, if you believe every cold case deserves another chance, if you believe truth deserves to surface, then take a moment to thumbs up like this video, speech balloon, share your thoughts in the comments, bell, subscribe to Buried Secret Media. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories back into the light and ensures that the next family still waiting for answers may finally receive them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering Marie. And remember, DNA never forgets, even when the world does.